friends. Welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the television show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Elliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. So when is a film just a film, and when is a film something more? That is the subject of our discussion today here on Chapters with author Anthony Viola, and we're going to talk about his outstanding work here in just a moment called The Art of Death, his latest novel. And Anthony Viola is a professor of English at Marshall University. He teaches literature and creative writing. He received his PhD in creative writing at Ohio University, and he's also taught at the University of Kentucky. His short fiction publications have appeared in Pleiades, a journal of new writing, Gulf Coast, the Connecticut Review, Athlon, Journal of Sports Literature, and 521 Magazine. One story was listed in 100 Other Distinguished Stories, Best American Short Stories of 2007, and another story received a Pushcart Prize nomination. The Art of Death is his first novel, the one we'll be talking about today, and that was adapted from a short story he wrote about 20 years ago. He's currently drafting his second novel while revising and writing additional short stories to compile into a collection. This second novel takes place in the fictional town of West York, Kentucky, adjacent to the Ohio River near the Indiana border. In his spare time, he likes to read, swim, watch sports and Netflix. He enjoys word puzzles, and he loves exploring new places and is intrigued with new things that have never been tried or attempted. He was born and raised in New York. West Virginia is the 6th state he's lived in, along with Pennsylvania, North Dakota, Ohio, and Kentucky. And he has 2 cats that he lives with as well, Rambo and Vinny. And we're delighted to have Tony Viola with us here today to talk to us about his outstanding new novel, The Art of Death. So welcome, Tony. Good to have you on Chapters, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Elliot. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
So this was such an interesting story, and there's so much I want to talk with you about it because there's so many things going on and great characters, and we'll get into all that. But at the heart of your novel, this book sort of centers on a black and white snuff scene. So for someone in our audience who isn't familiar with that, what is a snuff scene and what is a snuff film?
Well, a snuff scene, it's very disturbing. It's a scene, it's an artistic scene where it's depicted that someone is actually murdered on the set. So it's not staged, it's not rehearsed, there's not editing shots and jump cuts or things along those lines. But as I found out when I had to do research for this novel, I also found out that a snuff scene or a snuff film is not biographical, meaning that in my research I found out that I believe that Charles Manson had videotaped or recorded some of the massacres or some of the killings that his cult had done. And by definition, that is not a snuff scene. It's done for monetary gain, for artistic purpose. So I think, to me, that's where that other dimension comes in, where I think it's a little more disturbing than just perhaps a serial killer or a psychopath, so to speak, recording his or her own accomplishments or twisted achievements.
So when you watch something like that, it seems like there is an expectation or an element in your mind as you're watching it that this is really going to happen, or this has really happened when you're seeing that develop.
Yes, and I think the idea that someone decided to do that, I think, really adds a whole other layer of makes it more unnerving, I think. Because this is perhaps not someone who is a serial killer, but doing this for artistic purposes. So yeah, and the viewer does believe that this is actually happening, and sometimes it takes a while to watch it several times before you realize that it's not actually real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting, very interesting. So what we have going on in this film is, or in this book about this film, is a character named Geo, and we'll talk more about him in just a minute. But what Geo stumbles upon in the novel, and this is really one of the main plot points that you write about, is there's a gap of time between the time the snuff film that he discovers is made and how this scene or this film sort of reemerges on the scene. So what causes this scene to reemerge, or this snuff scene to reemerge, and how does Geo sort of stumble upon that?
Well, it reemerges. He's in a 19-year marriage, and he and his wife are estranged. They're no longer there's no more love left in their marriage. She's actually having an open affair with someone else. He's had at least one affair in the past couple of years or so. So it's a marriage more of financial convenience The novel does take place in New York, so the idea of trying to get divorced in a area where the cost of living is extremely high, they've decided not to do that yet. Also, he's holding out because he has an ailing relative that he wants to have him live his last few years outside of a nursing home and in like a more normal, domicile. So as a result, he's drifted towards commercialized pornography and things along those lines. And as he's in his sort of video store, DVD store rental that he has a subscription to, a membership to, he comes across a title and he remembers a little bit about the title, or sparks a memory. It's the distributor that sparks a memory for him, and he just can't quite place it because this was 20 years ago when he was involved with these people. So he just goes on that alone and decides to rent it. And what he's attempting to do at the time is to try and watch this with his wife, to try and invigorate that feeling that's lost. They don't really feel much toward each other. There's no more passion. So he's hoping that that this can help get them in the mood. So it's kind of like a romantic gesture, but in a little more twisted sort of way, I would say.
Yeah, very, very interesting, and they've got a fantastic relationship, the two of them, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But you alluded to Gio and what's going on in his life. His mother abandons him. His uncle is suffering from pancreatic cancer. He comments about Willie Orlando's death being something that impacts him. So here is a character that has seen a lot of loss in his life and has seen a lot of loss, and it seems like that is something that continually comes up or sort of hovering in the background of the book as we go forward, and he kind of talks about that, or Gio mentions that a lot, that he sort of thinks about his uncle and thinks about his marriage a lot as he's going forward with the investigation or looking into this snuff film. So he's a character, I think, that really personally and what he's experienced kind of carries that darkness with him, just like a snuff film is somewhat dark. He seems to be a character that carries a lot of darkness with him.
Yes, he does. One of the reasons why I chose the name Gio, it's short for Giovanni, and in the book I've referenced that his mother names him after Giovanni Verrazzano, the Italian explorer who the Verrazzano Bridge is named after. And what I tried to do was make him an explorer, but in this case a philosophical explorer of life and death. And as you find out from reading the novel, you find out that death has he's been exposed to death at a very, very early age, and it seems to frequently come up, which is normal in anyone's life, but it seems as if that's the forefront for him, that those are the experiences that he remembers, and it does oddly seem to follow him, I think, in ways that it's suggestive that not that he's the Grim Reaper, but that he brings death to just about everything he encounters, whether it be a work relationship or work or family relationships, or whatever it happens to be.
He's got an interesting relationship with his wife Clarice, and I wrote down a quote which I think just sums up his marriage to her completely. And he says his attitude, or the novel references this, his attitude of over their 19 years of marriage has developed from infatuation to repulsion, to infatuation back to repulsion, a perfect annoyance. And when you look at these two characters, you mentioned that she started having an affair back when she was in college. She had an affair with one of her professors and is now having an affair with Brad, a guy named Brad. But you think about a perfect annoyance, that seems to be how they are. They annoy one another, and there's a sense that these two characters, they're the only two that could be with one another. No one else could tolerate what the other's doing to each other.
Yeah, very true. One of the things I noticed as I was writing this, I noticed this later on, is that every time I had them talking to one another, they were just jabbing at each other. But they knew enough about each other's personal lives or backgrounds to really just dig in and just, go at it. And those were really fun scenes to write. Because sometimes I think they're borderline comical, like in a dark humor type of way. I think at one point, Gio comments about Clarice buying Brad presents, and he says something along the lines like, "Did you get that wrapping paper that costs like $25 a roll?" And she says, "Oh, you mean the same price that you pay monthly for one of your porn sites?" You know, so they just lash out at one another. And the perfect annoyance, when I actually wrote that, I had a simile included in there. It was like the simile was it's like a pop song that you buy and you listen and you just love it and you listen to it over and over and over again. And then like several months later, every time you hear it, you cringe. And then you put it away for a while, and then you listen to it and like, oh, this is really good. And you listen to it over and over and over again, and you indulge yourself in it to the point where it goes from infatuation to repulsion, infatuation to repulsion, but you can't seem to shake it off as well.
And I think that's a perfect example for the kind of relationship that those two have. I wanted to ask you, too, about Geo. One of his partners we meet along the way, or someone he's been associated with through his earlier ties with film and with movies and that kind of thing, is named CJ. And he calls Geo Zippo, gives him this nickname Zippo. So what is the significance of that name for the story in terms of what Geo does and kind of developing his character a little bit, that nickname Zippo?
I mean, when I came up with that name, I had done it years and years ago, because this has been a work that I've like a perfect annoyance. I would be infatuated with it, then I'd be repulsed by it, put it aside, and then come back to it. So I gave him that nickname several years ago, and I think at the time I was putting a lot of symbolism into the novel, and Zippo it's a lighter, so the flame, representative of the human spirit, that type of thing. But the way CJ explains it, his Zippo is trusty and reliable. Also makes cigarettes taste good. One of your more upscale type of lighters too. So it fits Geo's character more so that it's sleek and comes through in a pinch, as CJ likes to say. And I played around with the fact that I think he has several nicknames. And even in one version, which was not a very good version of the novel, he has no name, just nicknames that other people call him. That was easy to do when the novel was in first person, but not easy to do when I switched it to third person.
Third person, very, very interesting, very interesting. Another technique you use, which I think is really interesting in terms of devices and style, is flashback. We have a lot of flashback where we're in the present scene with Geo, or we're with him as he's talking to CJ, or with him as he's with Clarice, and then we sort of step back in time and we get some information that kind of fills in the story in terms of what's happened to Geo in the past. Is that something that you intended to use starting out, that flashback technique, or did that just happen as you were putting the novel together in terms of putting those flashbacks in and thinking about where would they best fit? How did you decide to use that technique?
I think that was from the very start. This started off as a short story, and I didn't really have many of those. I had a couple of those scenes in there. Actually, it was all in the past, now that I think about the short story. But then I thought I had to put it in the present in order for it to work. And I had just watched the film, I had used it in a class that I taught, a creative writing class, Memento, by by Christopher Nolan, which is based on a short story by his brother, Jonathan Nolan, Memento Mori. And it was that framework where I was driving either to school or back from class, and it just hit me. Like, that's how I can structure this novel. I can play the past and the present off one another. And I wanted to show the maturation, so to speak, how the snuff films in the past were, in the early stages, were really comical in a horrible way, that they were just juvenile. They're very superficial, underdeveloped, and how that got more and more realistic, which could lead to that one scene that Geo's unsure if it was real or not. So it helped in that regard too.
That's good. And I like the flashbacks because sometimes you can have flashback scenes in novels that take you out of the story and then you forget where you are. But I really felt like the flashbacks gave a lot of good insight and gave us that depth as we were going through. So we learned a lot about the characters and sort of how they got to this position. Another character that pops up in the story as we read is Judd. And you write this about Judd. Judd would turn on you the second you opened up and trusted him, which I thought was a great quote and a great way to summarize someone. So tell us a little bit about Judd and his relationship with Geo.
Sure. Judd's probably one of my favorite characters because he is the most despicable character I've probably ever created. I think when I was thinking of Judd, I thought of Iago from Othello because I really loved him because he is so despicable. I also described Judd, I think, well, I don't really describe him like this in the novel, but how I describe him to other people is he's that spider that you feel crawling up your back that you can't reach and flick away. That's how creepy he is, and that's what I try to keep in mind when I wrote him in the novel. He's and also one of the fun parts too is having that conflict. There's a certain jealousy, almost like a sibling rivalry between him and Geo over the attention for CJ. CJ comes across as a pseudo father figure, and he is Judd is CJ's stepson. We never really find out how or why that is the case. But the attention that Geo gives to Geo, actually that CJ gives to Geo, by calling him Zippo, by always bragging about the things that he does, you can see that gets Judd riled up. So Judd starts calling Geo hotshot, but he does so in a sarcastic way. And I think just there's definitely they're jealous of one another, but then that's in the past, and then when they encounter each other in the present, it's a different scenario, and that was also a fun scene, I think, to write too.
Yeah, and he's a great character. You're absolutely right, and I found myself so interested in every page he was on because you just knew something was going to happen. He was up to something. He was working an angle. He was up to something. You always could tell that from him. So he's a great character. I wanted to ask you about your titles because as we go through the novel, we see titles pop up: Death by Love, Death by Humor in certain sections. What is the significance of those titles?
Well, this has gone through so many revisions, and the original title at one point was What They Did. Of course, when it was in first person, it was What We Did, so I just changed the pronoun. And I just found that wasn't really capturing the essence of the novel. So I looked for something that would be more marketable, something that would stand out, and I just thought The Art of Death, because that's essentially what the film is really, the film within the novel is exploring, that art. And then I thought of perhaps making this more essay-like and more philosophical by having it broken down into several sections, and I think there's 8 total. And it's death by life, death by baptism, death by love, death by friends or friendship by friends, death by humor, death by art, and I think death by birth, death by art, and then death by death, which I'm still not quite sure what that means. It's death by death, but it was just a way of grouping it together and trying to impose another layer of meaning, a theme within those scenes that are already there. Because the other titles within those are more grounding titles to let the reader know where the characters are, and because it does shift around, in time. So I thought that was a nice little technique to do.
Very good. It's such a unique story, the whole storyline and everything that goes on. So where did you come up with the idea for this kind of a story?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, I was really young, in my early 20s, extremely naive, thought I saw a snuff film. In one of the films that I reference in the novel, A Boy and His Dog, which is a sci-fi, post-apocalyptic sci-fi novel film, I think based on a novella by Harlan Ellison, which actually stars Don Johnson, I think, in his first film, pre-Miami Vice days. It's a post-apocalyptic scene where the bunch of the survivors, their main currency is canned food, and they actually have like a circus tent thing set up where they show films. And in order to get into the movie nights, as they call them, you had to pay with a can of food. And I was watching this and just completely unaware, and what they were watching were snuff films. And that just really, it terrified me in a lot of ways. For about 2 days, I felt very uncomfortable after seeing that. And just because I thought, like, why would anyone want to film this? And then I thought, this is happening in a movie where it's a post-apocalyptic setting. The most precious commodity is canned food, yet people are paying to see this. And that just really again disturbed me quite a bit. So I I think by writing the short story, which was the first thing that I did, and then turning it into a novel, I was kind of exercising that 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 from me, that just darkness from me. I had to get it out. I couldn't unsee it, so I had to do the next best thing.
You mentioned that, like your quote, "the perfect annoyance." That you've been dealing with this storyline for a long time. Is it a situation where you worked with it and wrote it until you just kind of got, I don't want to say disturbed, but maybe bothered by the whole thing, and then stepped away for a while and then went back to it, or was it just that complex of a story that it took you that long to sort of work your way through it?
I mean, a couple of reasons why. When I started this, I had a 2-year position at University of Kentucky, and that's when I started turning it into a novel. At the time, about a year after I started that, I had to go on the job market, and then I had an interview here, and then I started working here, and the transition was a bit rough, so I didn't get a chance to work on it as much. So other things, just things in basic life came up. So I decided to, I did finish it, and I finished it in the first person at the time, and I put it aside, and like all good writers, what they should do is they should, give some time. After you complete something, go back to it. Then when I read it, I was like, this isn't working. There's a lot of things that I could change here. And I started reading, I think it was The Human Stain by Philip Roth, and other movies that had, other novels that had multiple perspectives. I think Russell Banks' The Sweet Hereafter was another novel. In the Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien had some interesting, different sections. So I began to re-see the novel in a different way, and one of those ways was switching into third person, multiple perspectives, because we do get other people's mindsets, and doing that, and then just changing things around, realizing that I was overly dramatizing scenes that had no value, that had no real merit to the larger plot. So a lot of that I could have just summarized in exposition really quick, and then moved on to the next item, and sustain the momentum that I wanted the present tense and the past tense to both, the present moment and the past moment to both have.
Okay, good. Another relationship I wanted to ask you about, or another scene involving a relationship that Geo has, going back to that for just a second, is a visit that Geo has with Mosley in Central Park. As you mentioned, the
yes.
novel's set in Central Park. Tell us a little bit about that scene, because I thought that was a really interesting scene between these two characters.
One of the things that I did when I knew I had to, when I wrote this novel, I knew since it was dark, I had to have humor in it at times, and I had to include other elements. So there's one scene where I said, I'm just going to have a clown in it. And it was Gentleman's Club. And I said, there's no way I can justify having a clown in there, but I did it anyway. I think at one point Geo says, why is there a clown here? But with the Mosley scene, I decided, since Mosley was the sound man, and I had the backstory of them already talking about music, I decided I structured the entire thing by their dialogue being the titles of pop songs. And then I overly did it, and then I cut back a little bit and had them have more real conversations. But then every once in a while they would throw a title of a pop song in there. But I also thought it'd be interesting to know that, or just to add from Mosley's perspective, that something in him stirred when he first met Geo. He's not sure if he's homosexual or not, but that was the first man he's ever seen where he's felt differently, about him. So I just thought that added a whole other layer. And I think one of the things that which can happen when you write from one perspective is you're just limited to that one character. By having these multiple perspectives and having them all comment on Geo from the outside, it makes Geo, I think, a more complex, more well-rounded character.
We mentioned at the beginning that you're working on a second novel that's going to be set in a fictional town of West York, Kentucky, which is adjacent to the Ohio River near the Indiana border. Can you give us an idea of what's going on in that novel, maybe what the premise is, and how far along you are with that book?
I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through at a very rough draft. I'm going to have to go back and obviously, add some things, do some more research, polish things up. But this is a different turn from this novel right here. I'm focusing on a small town that in the early 1990s was strip mined, and coal company came in. They really more or less damaged the town, severely devastated the town, left its infrastructure crumbling, damaged the water supplies, the air quality, so there were deaths and things along those lines, and the town just plummeted from that point on. And the novel takes place at the very, like about 14, 15 years later, when right next to that town, another energy company comes in and wants to hydraulically fracture the gas reserves. So now there's that concern of, are they going to do the same thing again that this other company did? However, this company has a different approach. They already start stimulating the economy to try and, you know, show that they are not the same company. So there's that sort of divide between the people who don't want that company to be in town and the ones that do. And it explores the whole fracking process, since that's a very political topic these days, since the decline of coal and natural gas is now seen as a possible replacement. So it deals with the environmental impact and the economical impact that natural gas extraction can have for a local community, and, you know, for maybe like for a state too, and generating much needed revenue nowadays.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like a great book, and we wish you well as you finish the last third of that draft, the first draft, to get it ready. So, Tony, in our final moments, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, to talk to you about your book, The Art of Death, or reach out to you to learn more about your short stories and other things that you're working on, how can they get in contact with you, and where can they get a copy of The Art of Death?
Well, on my website, which I still need to do an AnthonyJViola.com, which I haven't done yet, I have a Wix site. It's ajviola1 .wix.com/AnthonyJViola. It is long and complicated, but that's one way to contact me. Also through email. Fortunately, I'm the first Viola at Marshall. So I'm viola@marshall.edu. I'm also anthonyjviola@yahoo.com. So those are definitely two ways. But my website, as soon as you go up to my website, there are two links. One where you can buy it through Amazon as a Kindle, and one where you can buy it through Barnes & Noble as a Nook. So they're both right there and easily accessible.
Very good. Tony Viola has been our guest today here on Chapters. We've been talking about his debut novel, The Art of Death, an interesting insight into film, into snuff film, and what happens when a lot of people are involved in this process, and we follow the protagonist Geo through a variety of different encounters and re-encounters with people from his past, and as those people come into the present. It's a terrific book. It's such a unique topic, a great read, and I certainly hope if anybody in our audience is looking for something to check out that's really going to keep them turning the pages, that they'll check out The Art of Death. But Tony, congratulations on the book, and thanks for coming on Chapters, and as you keep writing more and as you get that second novel done, we'll have you back on to talk about it. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Elliot. It's been a pleasure.
And we also want to take a moment to thank Empire Books and News for their on-site support and assistance today, and also for providing us some much-needed updated set materials here for our episodes of Chapters. We encourage you to stop by Empire Books and News and check out their selection of books. Many of the authors, editors, and publishers that have been featured on the program have their books for sale right here at Empire Books and News. So stop by, talk to Natalie Sheets, the new general manager at Empire Books and News, and her staff, and they can get you taken care of with whatever it is that you like to read right here at Empire Books and News. And if you want to reach out to us here on the program, we've got a variety of ways that you can do so. One of the ways that you can do that is through email, and our email address is there at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. We also have a YouTube page through the Armstrong One Wire program on YouTube, and that address is also here at the bottom of the screen, www.youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire, which is all one word. From there, click on the Chapters tab, and you can go back and look at over 3+ years of author, editor, and publisher interviews archived for you there. And you can also reach out to us on Facebook. We now have a Chapters page on Facebook. So if you're active on Facebook, just go into the search field, type in Chapters, and from there you can find all of our episodes archived there as well. Interact with viewers and comment on what you've seen. So we've made that available to you also through Facebook. So please check us out there as well if you're a Facebook fan. And we also want to remind you of the monthly Writers Can Read event held here at Empire Books and News. It's the third Monday of each month from 7 o'clock until 8:30. It's open to anyone in the public. It's a free event. We encourage you to come to not only participate in the readings, but also fellowship and interact with the authors and the writers from our community. You can even share something that you're working on now or that you've been working on, or something that inspires you from another author or someone that you know that is a writer, and you can share that with the audience as well. It's a lot of fun. It's a free event. Writers Can Read open mic event, third Monday of each month right here at Empire Books and News all year long. So we encourage you to stop by and check that out. We look forward to seeing you there for that event as well. And that is going to do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.